China's human rights records is one of those stories that just won't go away. One of the questions that followed US President Barack Obama out of China was whether he had pressed human rights hard enough with President Hu Jintao. David Mattis is a Canadian human rights lawyer and the author of Bloody Harvest, the killing of Falun Gong for their organs. David Mattis, welcome to the program.
Thank you for inviting me.
First, a general question. How would you assess China's treatment of human rights at the moment? Better or worse than, say, 5 years ago?
I think you have to look at the type of human right. When you're dealing with economic rights, I would say there's probably an improvement. When you're dealing with political or freedom of expression rights, it's as bad as it was or even worse.
How and where has it become worse?
Well, one of the areas that I'm involved in is the issue of killing Falun Gong for their organs. And we've been tracking this over time. That area has become worse because the only other source for organs is prisoners sentenced to death. And the death penalty has gone down. The volume of transplants has remained the same, so that the killing of Falun Gong for their organs has increased. That's an area where it's become worse.
So what about the international response to this behaviour? Has international pressure had any influence on the way the Chinese authorities are going about this ghoulish practice?
Yes, the issue's been raised by the United Nations Rapporteur on Torture, the United Nations Rapporteur on Religious Intolerance, the UN Committee Against Torture. The foundational rights at play have come up at the Universal Periodic Review. The World Health Organization has been engaged on this issue, and there has been a change in Chinese behavior. They have said that the transplants can be done only in regulated hospitals or registered hospitals. They have started an organ donor system in August of this year. They have promised a law sourcing organs from the brain dead, cardiac alive. They have said that a priority would be given to Chinese nationals so that the foreign transplant tourism has abated. We've seen lots of changes because of international concern. And I guess you could say that the demand problem has been almost solved, but the supply problem remains. They're still sourcing organs from Falun Gong practitioners, and even more so than before.
You say that international pressure has had some influence. What should the world community do now to deal with the way in which Chinese authorities have adapted to that pressure?
The Chinese government now accepts, first of all, they acknowledge that organs are coming from prisoners. They don't acknowledge that it's coming from Falun Gong prisoners. They say it's coming only from prisoners sentenced to death. But they acknowledge also that the sourcing of organs from prisoners is wrong. They have started to move to an organ donation system. They are willing to move to a sourcing from brain dead, cardiac alive. So if you put that all together, it is possible, I would think, to get the international community and get the Chinese government to move towards sourcing organs from reputable sources, donors and accident victims, and away from prisoners. And obviously, if they stop sourcing organs from prisoners, they're going to stop sourcing them from Falun Gong prisoners. So that seems to me the way to go.
You've talked about the way in which you believe human rights conditions have worsened in relation to organ harvesting, but you also suggested that there were other areas where human rights had deteriorated too. Could you enumerate those?
Well, for the Olympics, for instance, we saw that there was a good deal of repression just to make sure that there was no incident in relation to the Olympics. So a lot of people were arrested. We see crackdowns on human rights defenders. Gao Zhisheng and other human rights lawyers tend to get arrested, beaten, thrown in jail. When you become a human rights defender in China, your chances of becoming a human rights victim are significant, and that's been a consistent and deplorable theme in recent history in China.
Another general question, do you believe that democratic governments and leaders have become more timid in human rights dialogue with China's leaders as China has become more economically powerful?
Some have, certainly. I wouldn't say that's consistent across the board. In Canada, we've had some fluctuation. For instance, the Dalai Lama recently was made an honorary citizen of Canada. And at the Universal Periodic Review, Canada spoke out against the persecution of the Falun Gong. But I would say there's other countries. I mean, the United States now is a good deal less critical of China with the current administration than it was with the previous one. And these, I would say, it's partly a matter of politics and who's in power, but it's also partly a result of the economic rise of China. But I should say that if you look at the economic trade of China with Canada at the time when its criticism grew more vociferous, or even with Taiwan under the previous administration, economic trade increased even while the criticism increased. So the fear that the economic rise of China, the fear that criticism will be bad for business has turned out practically not to be the case.
You suggested a moment ago that the Obama administration had been less forthright on human rights than had been George W. Bush. However, President Obama did directly raise the issue of the Dalai Lama in public with Hu Jintao, and also encouraged the Chinese to resume dialogue with the Dalai's representative. That's pretty straightforward, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's positive. There's definitely been some positive developments. And I would say that what we need is a lot more of that sort of forthright, open, public, consistent concern and criticism. There has been a tendency, I would say, to shy away particularly from the Falun Gong persecution because the Chinese government is so vociferous in its opposition to the Falun Gong, and even those people who and countries and organizations that are engaged in human rights make a strategic consideration to stay away from objecting to Chinese repression of the Falun Gong simply because the Chinese communists are so obstreperous and so persistent about it. And I would say when we're talking about answering answering the Chinese and dealing the Chinese government and dealing with them, we have to be concerned not only about raising human rights issues, but dealing with the worst violations first, and not shying away from the worst repression simply because the Chinese government is so insistent on it.
David Matters, thanks very much.
Thank you.